Imagine a woman who's applying for a job. What assumptions do you think employers will make about her skills, her competencies, and her experiences that might bias their decision to hire her? Now, also imagine she's a woman of color. How do you think they'll judge her personal appearance? Do you think they'll have any qualms about whether her personal appearances are considered professional? And now also imagine that she is someone with a disability. How accommodating do you think the employers are going to be about her application, especially if they think they've already gone well outside their comfort zone? This is one of the many ways that intersectionality shows up in the workplace. Our lived experiences and our challenges that we face are not just based on our gender, but on a host of other identities that are part of our daily lives. My name is Shavi Vaklu, and I want to thank you all for joining in on the talk today. Together, we can create a plan for intersectionality and make sure that no woman is ever left behind. Intersectionality is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 80s. She gave a popular TED Talk that was published in 2016, which talks about the urgency of intersectionality. In the talk, she outlines how different parts of a person's identity can lead to a compounding of discrimination, which can't be solved by just addressing one of the causes. So how does this show up in the workplace? I first heard about the gender pay gap when I entered the workforce around 14 years ago. At that time, I was working for a company that had this big poster in the kitchen that said women make 77 cents to a man's $1. That stat was quite moving for me. Every time I was in the kitchen making myself some tea, I would stare at that sign and resolve to not be a part of that stat. What I didn't find out until a couple of years later was that the full picture was never really there. Today, that number for the gender pay gap stands at 82 cents. However, now there's widely available data for that number broken down by race and gender. When I looked at that data broken down by race, I realized that I am privileged in comparison to other races. It makes me sad that some women are very far behind in the fight for pay parity. And who knows what else the data is hiding? Are there other data points broken down by a different identity, such as age or marital status, that point out even bigger gaps? At this point, I don't even know. As I started looking at the information for the gender pay gap, I tried to look for data points for other demographics. The reality is that it's really hard to find some information broken down by different identities. However, there is plenty of evidence of other forms of discrimination besides the pay gap that show large inequalities for other intersections. Sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination is one such area that is pretty well documented. The themes along which someone faces discrimination can be pretty similar to what all women might encounter. Workplace harassment, healthcare discrimination, legal setbacks. These are areas where women have faced challenges too. However, if you are a woman and a lesbian, your chances of workplace harassment and your ability to get hired, get promoted, and not get fired go way up. Similarly, transgender women face additional challenges in getting healthcare, which already puts a burden on women for a lot of things. And transgender women face additional limitations in access to healthcare and sometimes treatment that is just outright harmful to them. And the legal system has also often failed women by just being too slow and too inadequate in its responses. And it continues to fail the LGBTQ population even more so, especially in the US. Less than half the states in the US have passed even the bare minimum level of laws to protect LGBTQ folks. There are many other ways intersectional discrimination can show up. Women of a different age than what is the norm in a certain situation can face challenges. Women who have a non-traditional education or went to school later, they can face bias as well. Women who are parents or who are taking care of their own aging parents can also encounter challenges. All of these intersections can face issues that are not always visible and talked about and don't fit into the normal narrative of all women's problems. So, what does all of this mean? There can be tons of ways we or someone we interact with may think about their identity. Some identities are just more visible than others, and some identities in a given situation can be the cause of more bias than other identities. This is a non-exhaustive list of different dimensions across which a person may or may not have privilege. Take a moment to look at these identities. Think about yourself and the people in your life. How many people do you interact with that belong to a different identity? Do you understand their challenges? If you don't, how can you actually educate yourself? And lastly, where can you acknowledge that you have privilege? We all have privilege in some places and not in others. It's important for us to be aware of that. Now think about your own role in solving for challenges arising out of intersectionality. You might be the person who's marginalized yourself. You are affected by the bias. Your priority in this case is to solve it for yourself and try to solve it for others. You're in a good position to see it. You can document it for others and understand it and try to change the status quo. Or you might be an ally, in which case you yourself are in a position of privilege in a given situation and you can do the work to help fix it for others. You'll be penalized far less, and in fact, most likely you'll be praised if you are selflessly solving it for someone else. And of course, there's always the chance that you are in fact the perpetrator. In some way, if you are amplifying the problems faced by those not in power, you are the perpetrator. You are either doing this through direct harm or indirectly when you choose to not decenter yourself in a problem. You have to have the self-awareness to admit that even if you are marginalized on one identity, you can still make things worse for other identities. And so, in any given situation, really think, if you are not the victim, then who do you want to be today? The ally or the perpetrator? As a society, we are programmed to believe that incremental steps are the best way to achieve our goals. One step forward on one small hill seems more doable and a better use of our time than 2 steps on 2 big hills. However, history teaches us a very, very different lesson. As demonstrated in the original suffragette and abolitionist movement, the trickle-down approach just didn't work. It didn't address the nuances of the challenges faced by women of color, with many Black women feeling especially disenfranchised by the narrative that did not always seem to include them. Frederick Douglass fought for Black people, but in his mind, Black women were a secondary priority. Susan B. Anthony fought for women, but she was not inclusive of Black women in the movement. Both of their efforts ultimately focused on the more privileged group within the subjugated section. Ultimately, it was Sojourner Truth who prioritized and fought specifically for Black women. And she did make a difference. She became the first Black woman ever to successfully sue a white man in court, which was a huge achievement for that time, and it inspired a lot of people to feel that they have rights. Learning from our history, we have to do better as a group and make sure we are being inclusive in our advocacy and just don't ask subgroups of women to wait their turn, just as women as a group have often been asked to wait our turn and be patient. Many women face discrimination and many face it frequently. However, the type of discrimination one person faces can be vastly different from someone else who's facing it across multiple intersectionalities. When those intersectional discriminations are being highlighted, it is up to the privileged group to decenter themselves and really listen to someone else's problems. This is Mahatma Gandhi, the world's first practitioner of the principle of non-violence on a large-scale political field. He dedicated his life to advocating for the marginalized, promoting harmony, and pursuing truth. In one of the last notes he left behind before his assassination, he wrote, "Whenever you are in doubt, recall the face of the poorest person and ask yourself if the step you contemplate will be of any use to them." This is a wonderful way to think about our own actions and practice the philosophy of prioritizing the needs of the disadvantaged. We are always faced with a lot of choices, especially in cases where we have some privilege. When deciding how to respond to those choices, why not pause and think about how our choices would not just impact our future, but the future of those who are most vulnerable, those that don't have a seat on the table, and they're hoping you'll use your seat to advocate for them. Based on that philosophy, I propose a 3-step plan to solve for intersectionality. The 3 steps are awareness, acknowledgement, and action. Awareness is the first step to solving any challenge, because if we can't see it and if we don't understand it, we really can't fix it. By default, it is hard to understand a problem that doesn't affect us directly. We are very used to seeing the situation from our own lens, and it's hard to even guess that there's a different lens that might exist. When you're making a decision, whether it be about a product or a process, think about how many people that decision affects. The larger the number of people affected, the more important it is for you to be thoughtful and to check for what biases might be incorporated into that decision. So how can we proactively build our awareness? We can consciously build our empathy. We can learn from people with different identities and try to understand their perspective and build empathy. When we are surrounded by people from similar backgrounds, we don't actually get a chance to hear a different perspective. Instead, we can seek out people who are different from us and go ask them to share their experience if they're willing and able to do so. We can try going to conferences and meetups that are welcoming allies to engage and learn about the challenges faced by a specific identity. Honestly, even something as simple as reading the agenda of what's discussed at an event for a different demographic can really help you start building curiosity. I recently had someone reach out to me and they very innocently asked why I had a talk specifically for women to learn how to advocate for themselves. So he knew that some people are shy and some people are not, so that part made sense to him. But he had never realized that this is a problem that affects people in other ways besides just regular shyness. Some women are not culturally trained to advocate for themselves because it is something that is seen as bragging, something that I, as a South Asian woman, am very well aware of. Of course, there are many other reasons that someone might find it hard, but at least I knew that there's one big subgroup that commonly identifies with this problem. And ultimately, this person who asked me this question showed curiosity, and I was very happy that they asked, because then I could actually explain the nuances of the situation to them. Next, as a way to build awareness, we can try to break our own code, which is a practice that engineers are very used to. If you're making a decision, look for loopholes, play devil's advocate, and see how your decision can unravel, and think of all the things that can go wrong. Sometimes the things that can go wrong are all the more likely to be problems only certain demographics encounter. In which case, it isn't so much that something is going wrong, but rather your solution just doesn't account for all the use cases. Knowing that upfront and building our awareness about it, it can help you decide what, if anything, you would like to and be able to do about it. For example, say you want to give a scholarship to women, and to apply, all they have to do is fill out a form online. Where does that process break? Perhaps if relevant people don't hear about the opportunity, or if they want to, but they can't actually apply it to the opportunity. So in this case, if most of your marketing tactic was through Twitter or Facebook, then essentially you're restricting your scholarship only to people who have time to spend on social media and have regular access to the internet. That may or may not be your intention, but only once you're aware of this restriction can you plan to solve for it. You may have intended for this prestigious scholarship to really target single mothers with young kids. They may not have the time to browse on social media, and thus, with your increased awareness, you can then come up with a different solution in that situation if if you understand the impact of it. Another way to build awareness is to intentionally look for the data. A lot of common issues that occur are documented, and there's usually data available online to back up and quantify individual problems. Even if there's no information specifically for a specific identity that you're curious about, it really does help to start thinking and proactively look for some of that information. Even related topics and data can be used in thinking about the problem. And identifying common places where the system fails can help you think about all of those things. Surveys can be helpful as well. If you want to get a pulse check on how something is playing out in the real world, just ask. The quantitative data can help show where the problem, how the problem shows up in aggregate, but it is also the qualitative data that can really help you find the niche concerns that people are bringing up. For example, say you're a hiring manager and you're trying to make a fair recruiting process. You're already aware that a lot of processes are biased against women. And so you are trying actively to adjust the process to remove those biases. But what about older women? Or what about women from a different nationality than what you'd hire by default? What biases do they face? Learning about the problems they face can help you think about solutions and make your process even more equitable. In general, it can make the process more fair overall, even for the identity you haven't yet thought about, since you're now removing bias at every step. The next step in the plan for intersectionality is acknowledgement. One part of that is just acknowledge and state the status quo. When you see something, say something. As you observe and become aware of how discrimination may be showing up, find ways to explicitly highlight those observations. You as an ally have the capacity to not face the consequences that usually come with highlighting an injustice. And that's a privilege you can use for the benefit of others. At my previous workplace, it was the people without kids who raised concerns that the company didn't have a formal documented parental leave policy. They prioritized asking leadership for their opinion and to figure out if there was something that they planned to do about it. Ultimately, they knew that if their colleagues who had kids started asking about it, it was more likely that they might face an unintentional penalty, because everyone would start wondering when they were going to take time off, and maybe their teammates would treat them differently. However, these people who were asking the question about the status quo were people who were assumed to be too far away from parenthood or had already crossed that life phase. Thus, it came across as advocating for fairness and making sure that the company was prioritizing being intentional in its policies. The other part of acknowledgement piece is acknowledge and admit your gaps. We are not in a position to know about every nuance, and there are some areas where we would have spent zero time thinking about that problem. This is not unusual. Rather than being embarrassed about your lack of exposure, be upfront that you're trying to learn and show genuine but non-intrusive curiosity. People you are trying to learn from will appreciate that vulnerability and be more inclined to spend that time getting you up to speed. If you're worried about offending someone, just state that you're trying to learn more, you don't have enough knowledge, and you're just asking to raise your awareness and be more thoughtful. People rarely get mad at folks who show a genuine willingness to learn and grow. My mother, for example, has worked with visually impaired people for many years, and she has encouraged many of her friends to volunteer on various projects. Part of the process is that as more people help out on these projects, they also get exposed to some of the problems that are faced by people who are visually impaired. Many are afraid to ask basic questions and just retreat in a corner. However, she always reminds them that they'd actually be in a much better position to help out if they improve their understanding and acknowledge that they just aren't aware of someone else's challenges, but that they very much are willing and able to learn about those challenges. The final step is to consolidate all your learnings and go into problem-solving mode. What can you do today as an ally to help marginalized identities and show up for other people? As you start thinking of solutions, find ways to hold yourself accountable by creating smart goals. Focus on measurable outcomes rather than just a general nudging towards equity. Your commitment and your perseverance towards building equity will be very important to the marginalized groups for whom you are showing up as an ally. It's also a good idea to include other people in your journey to create equity for all women. Share your learnings, ask people to chime in with their thoughts, and brainstorm solutions. There is a lot of talent to be utilized within your network in order to be able to come up with creative solutions. As women, we thrive on building community. And if our community is not inclusive, then we are no better than those who have marginalized us. We are advocating for justice and fairness and pushing for everyone to have an equal chance at success. That cannot happen if half our sisters are still battling systemic issues that have absolutely nothing to do with their gender. The women who have to worry about low access to education, mostly on the basis of their faith, they deserve our support too. The women who are dealing with violence because of their gender identity, we have to show up for them just like they consistently always show up for us. And the women who've been pushed aside due to their age, they helped start some of our fights, and now is our time to advocate for what they need. If we don't prioritize fighting for the rights and needs of all women, then we risk amplifying power structures that oppress others, just like we were oppressed. We must prioritize the rights and needs of all women. If we don't, the privileged amongst us will end up creating and perpetuating new forms of oppression against the women that are less privileged. Thank you all for prioritizing planning for intersectionality and making sure no woman is left behind. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please find me on Twitter and reach out and share your observations. I would love to connect. Thanks again.